Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Gibson. I'm here with Steve Cleere, the co-founder of NexxLevel Brands. Thanks so much for being here. We're excited to have you to learn from all the work that you've done. You have pretty significant background in CPG, and as I said, you're the co-founder of NexxLevel Brands. So what you do now is help many different companies as they progress in their journey to retail shelves. So tell us a little bit more about your company and how does it you help?
Yeah, we try to do that. So the idea behind NexxLevel Brands was basically taking some of the experience that I had previously with larger CPG companies and working in roles with them, mainly as an agency in marketing, retail marketing specifically, and combining that with my wife's expertise in education and training, and putting that together to try to bring some of that information, or what we like to call the secrets of the big guys, down to the level where people who are starting out don't get caught off guard about what's happening out there, because it is an industry that's been around for quite a long time. It has some things about it which, even though you may be a disruptor in a category, there's no disruption of the entire industry except for Amazon, which did that. But in terms of being a brand or growing a product line within the industry, there are some things that you're going to run into that everybody else that's out there working runs into too, and they apply to Nabisco or they apply to you. And so what we're trying to do is take that and package that knowledge in such a way that folks can absorb it, learn from it, and then implement it in their businesses.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think so helpful too, because when you look at a big company, it's hard to always look at what were all the steps that really somebody went through to get there. And when you're just starting, you're not going to operate in that same way as that big company. So for you to be able to take all that knowledge and really break it down into those very specific steps of what they need to focus on first as they're going through their journey.
And the other thing too is with larger CPG companies, yes, they have deep pockets, and that's one of the things that's obviously a huge resource for them. But there's a lot of other things that they also have. They have a lot of knowledge. They're able to get their hands on a lot of data. They're able to experiment in ways that a solo entrepreneur can't really do. But the playing field has become more level, particularly because of e-commerce now and the effect of e-commerce on both companies and also on retailers. Both have been incredibly affected by what has happened with Amazon, but it's probably actually given the smaller companies a better chance than they've ever had to be able to succeed in the industry.
That's actually a good pivot, because we're going to walk through today six things that you work with when you're working with companies to try to get them from the startup phase onto a retail shelf. And so I'm going to list them real quick so that people can track along. So for everyone that's watching now, would be a really great time to take out your notebooks if you don't already have them out. We're going to go through research. We're going to go through product, packaging, pricing, passion, and last but certainly not least, in fact, maybe the most important, funding. Actually having dollars to make this all happen.
Yep, so very important.
Let's start with research. Tell me what companies should be thinking about as it relates to research and go to market here.
So basically, the six things that you talked about as we call them the pillars of success have come about. My experience, my background, that of the companies I've worked with, there are a few things that just keep cropping up again and again and again that you kind of need to have ducks in a row. And there's also areas where, surprisingly enough, a lot of people start out in the business, want to succeed, but don't have those things going for them. So that's where we get it. Research about knowing the industry. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of things about the industry that's been around a long time. Food, beverage, health, and wellness all share this commonality of like super products, whether they work really well or they taste really good or whatever it is. But this a whole thing of product orientation. When you're small and you're selling at a farmer's market or you're selling at a local co-op, fine, you're very, very product focused. So mine is organic, mine comes in sustainable packaging. As soon as you begin to move into growing that business, you move from the food, beverage, health, and wellness business into the logistics business, because that's how big stores and big retail operates. And Amazon operates on a logistics business, and this is Q4 we're going into. A lot of people are feeling pressure from Amazon about supplying them. So it's not just retail, it's all across the board, no matter where you're going. But the cool thing about this industry, as opposed to something like tech, if you're an entrepreneur, is you can do your research by going online at Amazon or walking into a grocery store, any Albertsons that you want to go into the section that you have a product idea for, or you already have a product, and look at that section. You can learn a whole number of things just right there, free university. Okay. So you can look at that and you can say, oh, I'm going to do tomato sauce. Tomato sauce all seems to be in 12.5-ounce round jars. So I probably shouldn't do a 2-pound octagonal glass cut jar. Right. You can learn those basic things. And then beyond that, there's a lot of available stuff online for accelerators and incubators that are out there. Some of them are, sponsored by, like, for instance, with Trailhead. And then there's ones in Chicago. There's ones in Portland, in Seattle. Los Angeles has a great one. So does San Francisco. You can go on their websites and begin to get some knowledge. And then there's courses and the community stuff like we provide that takes you then just further in depth into that learning process to know about the industry, so that you understand what's coming around the corner, so that you don't get surprised by it. You're ready for it.
Yeah, that's key. Some of those differentiators that might have stood out at a farmer's market, as you said, do not make you efficient necessarily as you're starting to ship. Like when you have a jar that doesn't look like everyone else's jar or doesn't fit in everybody else's slot.
And sometimes you can make that a good thing, right? You can be different, but you have to be really good in order to be that different. And then there's some basics about food and beverage in particular, that you have health regulations. You have things that you have to have right before you go out. There's other things in terms of you can research pricing, you can research the packaging aspect. We're going to talk about a little bit more, but you can do all of those things and get that basic grasp of how does the industry work.
Yeah, really getting a solid sense of the environment around you and the environment that you're operating in. Yeah, that's great. So let's move on to product now. Tell me more about what you walk companies through with product.
So companies, when they're getting together, there's almost not necessarily a pattern, but there's sort of a correlation of a couple of different things that drive people. Some people are very mission based, particularly food, beverage, health, and wellness. It may be vegan, plant based. It may be driven by, in many cases, individuals have started successful companies because they or a member of their family had some type of health or food restriction. All right. And so they started. So, Cauliflower, big company, well-known, was started because she basically had type 1 diabetes and loved pizza, was trying to find some way to get around that. So, Aunt Fanny's Cleaners, same thing. It's a daughter in the family, deathly allergic to normal household cleaning products. So he goes and invents his own, and then boom, it becomes a company. So creating a winning line is more about, okay, if it's grandma's brownie recipe and you really want to make grandma's brownie recipe, national and basis, whatever, creating a line is first of all is to understand that just one product, just one box of grandma's brownies is probably not going to be a successful company. You need a line. So maybe you need butterscotch flavor, chocolate flavor, because again, the way the industry is built, there's efficiencies in having more than one product in a line and more than one size sometimes. It also spreads costs out over, and it brings more people to try your product if in fact you have slightly different variations. So they can all be smoothies, but don't make them all smoothies based on kale, because that just doesn't cross a wide enough ground. And then basically the idea of the product, again, for success is to understand who's going to use your product, who's going to buy it. It isn't necessarily, we always use family and friends, right? Test it on our family. It's great. Oh, I love it. It's the best soup I ever had. No, it's probably not, but they're going to tell you that anyway. You got to spread out a little bit beyond that to a wider group of people to test your product, test the validity of the product. And you do that usually through whether it's farmers markets or holiday bazaars or selling in a couple of local shops just to see what's going on. And then nowadays, of course, with the advent of Amazon and the other e-commerce platforms, you can very easily test the validity of a product and get great feedback from people without having to go off and do focus groups or something terribly expensive to prove your product. But you kind of have to get that idea down. What am I producing? How am I going to produce it? And, and then moving on, which we will, of course, to pricing, which is what am I going to charge for it? And will people pay it?
Yeah. So getting scrappy, even with, I mean, you talked about this a bit in the research, but getting scrappy even on the product side of being creative with who you bring into that circle for feedback. Yep. And then also not doubling down so much on this is the one product, but actually recognizing that people want choices, even if your one product is really, really great.
Yeah. If your formulation is so exact, it's very hard to scale it. It's very hard to take it, quote unquote, into production, or what we call commercialize it, because you just won't get that same flavor, same taste. And, and I've worked with people who've had that, issue, like in confection, the very high-end confection, where as soon as they tried to make it somewhere other than in their own commercial kitchen they were renting, they couldn't duplicate it, could not really duplicate the flavor or the texture or whatever it was. But just, it's all the same ingredients, but I have many more of them, and the way they come together and the way that, if you go to a co-packer or co-manufacturer, you'll have the same issue. Is you'll make it according to the formula. They'll make it according to the formula. They'll taste different, not bad, but different.
Let's move on to packaging and talk more about that particular aspect of the product.
CPG, consumer packaged goods. So whether it's a box, a bottle, a jar, whatever it is, the thing we have in common is that it's something in a package. The package plays a critical role in what we're doing. The reason behind this is twofold. Number one is just simple protection of the items. So it's, why do you put it in cardboard? You put it in cardboard so that it's not in a bag getting smashed. Or you put it in a resealable bag because it's something that's not going to be used up in one sitting. So there's that practical aspect of what do I put this in, and then there's choices. So do I put it into glass jar and I want to be more eco-friendly, or do I put it into plastic, or how do I do that? So packaging important. Packaging itself, remember, is the message unit, the message vehicle that everybody has to use to get their product out there. Because yes, you can be at a farmer's market, or you can be doing a demo at the co-op, and you can talk to people and say, hey, this is really great, you got to try it. But 99% of the people who purchase your product will see it, learn about it the first time by looking at your package, either on Amazon or on a shelf, or whatever. They're going to look at your package. So the package needs to convey a very clear message about what your product is and what it does. This is not made easy by the fact that in food and beverage, packaging is quite regulated in terms of what you need to message to the consumer. So by the time that you put your full nutrition statement, your ingredient statement, your corporate address, and your logo, your directions, right? Any warnings about allergens or anything else, you don't have a lot of creative space left in most packaging to really do the job. But you can do it with colors, you do it with typeface, you do it with, different things to try to get people interested. And then in the phraseology we use is to cut the clutter, which is how do you cut the clutter and get, again, walk into a grocery store, go to the section that you're in, get your iPhone out, take a picture of the section and look. If all the packages are blue and green themed, maybe you want to do an orange one, right? So it's that type of, it can make a difference. Keith Belling of Right Rice and Pop Chips, Keith Belling did that in the rice section. And he went in and he said, all the rice stuff is yellow and white. So he made his package black, which, by the way, went against a cardinal rule of food packaging, which you were never supposed to use black. Now it's quite common, but it wasn't then. But he said, I if nothing else, I pop.
And that's interesting too. You mentioned the regulations, because I see not just in packaging, but in a lot of different areas. I think some people get so caught up in what the regulations are and making sure that they're following the rules that they forget kind of that actual purpose, which goes back to what you were saying initially about research. If you know your customer, then you understand, right, where you make those trade-offs in the packaging.
Yep. Is your customer going to read the nutritional values? Are they that kind of a shopper? Well, if they are, you might want to call out one or two of your really good values on the front of the package. Don't make them pick it up and have to turn it around. If you maybe don't want to talk about what the nutritional values are, then obviously, you don't do that. But yeah, the packaging as a messaging vehicle is just absolutely huge, because it's where people really learn about your product. And initially in the stages of trial, it's where they're going to make their decision to buy or not, is holding the package in their hand.
Yeah. Do you see people changing their packaging as they scale? I mean, certainly the difference between a farmer's market and actually going into retail, but even as they get bigger within retail, do you see that changing much as somebody grows up as a company?
Most of the time, along the journey, there is one or two major packaging changes. The first one tends to be size. And it tends to be because however the person started with creating the food, creating the beverage or whatever, they put it into something that they had available. And traditional jarred products, for instance, everybody starts out in mason jars because you can go buy them. They're the same size. They have the screw-on tops. We're all good. But that particular size is made for canning and made for jams and jellies, whatever, may not be quite right for tomato sauce, for instance, because you may need more tomato sauce to serve for, right, and for a dinner. So you kind of got to go back again into the research and look at where those are. The second impact that comes with packaging in the maturity of a CPG company is price. Because a lot of people who are on the upscale, which most of your emerging brands are on the upscale end of product development, they cost more per ounce anyway than whatever the big guy product is on the shelf from Kraft or Nabisco or whoever. So one of the ways that you can get closer to some type of parity or keep a price, let's say below a $10 price point, is by reducing the size of the product that you're putting out there. And a lot of that comes through experimentation and understanding a lot about what the usage is. Resealable. At one time, there were very few resealable bags or packages used for food, and now almost all of them are, because they realized that package was not made for sitting down and eating in one fell swoop.
Yeah, it's a huge growing trend in recent years. So. And good segue on the price as it relates to packaging, because it can be a really expensive piece of that total P&L, really. Tell us more about pricing.
So the pricing, and we're sort of working our way up in critical nature. So pricing is a very, very tough thing to start out initially, because you're making, for most entrepreneurs, they're making the product themselves or with family members or with friends. They may start out under the cottage laws, making it home. They may then go to a commercial kitchen or a restaurant kitchen that they're renting, but they're still basically hand batching everything. And it's very hard to know, to begin with, what a product is going to cost at scale once it's commercialized from what you're doing for the farmer's market in your initial runs. And what happens with a lot of entrepreneurs going out is they do their research in the category a little bit, and they look at the pricing and they say, oh, well, I need to be $5.95 on the shelf because there's nobody over $5.95. The problem is that what they've created in the formula that they have and in the size that they have is going to cost them $7 to produce. So there's this little conflict. And there's a couple of different ways of approaching that. But what most people do is they price it fairly, and they think they've got it. They're making a little money on each item, but not a whole lot. And then comes the day when somebody at the store is interested in buying their product. They say, oh, this is really great, Amanda. We love this. You need to come in through UNFI, who is a very large distributor. Well, UNFI wants 20 to 30% markup on your product. If you didn't build that into your cost at the farmer's market, you all of a sudden are losing money on everyone you sell. So there's that aspect. It has to be wholesale pricing has to be adjusted to, take into account that when we expand, we are going to, we're going to have to include a distributor and maybe sometimes a broker. That's another 5 or 7%. But the pricing aspect is pretty simple in the fact that so much of the emerging brands, so much of the stuff that's out there now that's better for you and like plant-based meats and whatever, while there is somewhat of an equivalency of pricing to what's already out there, it really doesn't matter. I mean, I've worked with people that when we looked at pricing for product and they were going to put it on Amazon, after all my years in the business, I said, you're crazy. This isn't going to sell. I mean, there's no way. Went on Amazon, selling just fine. Thank you. So I sort of gave up looking at ceiling prices. I'm more interested in testing it at whatever price you need with as much margin as you need in terms of the pricing. If you go to websites, a lot of the incubator sites, whatever, and they'll say, oh, well, how much should I have in a food or a beverage or a beauty product or whatever in terms of margin? And they'll say, well, 40% or whatever. And I say, you know what? If you can do it at 100%, do it at 100% because that's going to go away at some point in time, right? Everything that you do from here on in is going to reduce your margins, but hopefully your cost of goods, your COGS, what it takes to produce a single unit is going to decrease because you're going to be buying in bigger quantities. You're going to be, the co-packer is more efficient than you doing it in your kitchen, all of those things. But you have to have a built-in, price mechanism. And then you adjust that also as you go through the journey. Your price becomes adjustable. Hopefully you lower it as your volume gets higher. You're able to lower your price and get more and more closer to whatever the mainstream price is for that particular item.
Yeah. So not starting cheapest of cheap at the beginning, but really giving that runway for yourself as unexpected costs come up, as they will. And then I, again, want to link this back to what you said about product, as your product will change as you go along as a company, but then also, again, with the research, if you know your customer, because you're mentioning a lot of things here where, things are going to come up and you're going to have to make trade-offs as to what the ingredients are, maybe what the packaging is. And so if a company doesn't know their customer very well at the beginning, they're not going to know where to make those trade-offs, and they're going to have to go back to the research. So I think it's great that you highlight research at the beginning, and note that it's often something that is skipped, because I think it's helpful for people to really go in and make sure that they're clarifying as they go what their customer actually wants.
Yeah. In general, the takeaway is of the group of people that I've worked with last few years, most of them had their product underpriced in the beginning. Maybe priced to sell at the farmer's market or whatever it was, but not enough margin in the product to be able to deal with a distributor, and not enough to have a real good margin in there, as you should. You should have a margin. You're in business to make money. But it's very critical. But I think a lot of people are a little scared of that, of going, well, gosh, I see these things, other things out here, and they're $4 and mine's $7. So, well, yeah, but yours might be worth $7. So it's that differentiation. And nowadays there's a huge gap between whatever is on the bottom shelf at the supermarket, which is the lowest price, largest container, to what's on the top shelf, and just huge margins, huge margin differences, and cost per ounce or cost per unit. A lot more fluctuation than there was, say, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. So pivoting on to passion. I think a lot of people think they have passion at the beginning, but say more about what you see as it relates to passion.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's a lot more subjective than the other things we're talking about. But the thing about passion is, if you go back and look at the people who've made a success of their businesses, it's a common trait that they all have. Now, that passion may simply be about food. It may be about, craft beer. It may be about whatever, but it is something that basically is consuming, and it is, the kind of number one thing in their life, if you will. And they're all in, and they really want to build this, as opposed to the, more hobbyist, if you will, who does something and kind of gets into it and really likes it, but doesn't want the pressure of taking this and making it in a factory, because that takes away the whole, the whole thing that they're into. They're into baking, or they're into making it, and they want to share it with other people. Well, okay. So the passion for the business, the passion for what you're doing, very important. The other one is the passion for purpose, which is a lot of people use the food, beverage, or health and wellness as a vehicle for helping to change agriculture, helping to change the food system, promoting better nutrition for children or the elderly. There's a lot of other passion things in here that we're simply doing this line of household cleaners because we want to help families out there who have children or family members who may be allergic to 409. I mean, it's just, that's all. And that drives it. And when you hit the bumps, which are inevitable, and the challenges and whatever, the passion is what gets you to power through it. Whereas some people hit those and they go, oh, I'm really tired and I don't really need to do the market every Saturday. And I want to do something else. I want to spend time with the grandkids or whatever else. And then, they're gone. So passion, you got to be in it to win it. As far as I'm concerned, that's the only people I've seen win it are people who have that passion in some form.
There will be bumps in the road for sure. And then it sounds like also kind of know yourself, because, and you tell me what you think about this, but it's not necessarily that you can't start something and then pass it off, but knowing at which point maybe you need to be bringing someone in to pass it off to if you're the started person.
Yeah, it's a tough industry, and a lot of times. So let's talk about just real quick the entrepreneur. The founder may have the skill set to get off the ground and may have, again, the passion. They are oftentimes the best salesperson for their food or beverage or health and wellness product. But depending upon their background and depending upon how their personality, they may get to a point where, first of all, you need team members. You can't do this on your own. So you've got to look at your team members, and you have to see who do I add to the team to make it stronger. And I did an interview once with a client who, we got down to this idea. There's a lot of stuff I could tell that she was reticent about doing. Just I could tell. And I'd say, okay, so why don't we do this? Let's put together a list of all the things you really like doing in the business and a list of all the things you really don't like doing in the business. And then the ones that you don't like, we'll see if sort of on an ongoing basis, and I think we looked at once a month, although that wasn't really practical, outsourcing that. So I came back with a list of 16 things on the I don't like side of the page and one at the top of the I like page, which was sales. She loves sales. So I said, okay, this is going to be a little tougher than I thought, but okay, let's start with, bookkeeping, right? Her husband's helping her with the bookkeeping. It's like, no, let's outsource it. So, the founder ability is, into that. Now, what happens as the business grows and your team grows is that eventually, I think most founders will find it easier to turn over a major portion of the business based on either what their talents are or their likes are. And those don't always match up, but right. So if you like baking in your kitchen, but you don't like the idea of being around smelly, big machinery, then when it goes from your kitchen to a co-packer, you're probably going to want to have somebody else taking care of production. Just that simple. So it's, build that back up. And then, I think a lot of founders make great spokespeople for their brand. And then, kind of move on to that. But if you're also a entrepreneur who cannot let go, this is a very hard business to deal in, because you very quickly, if you're successful at all, outstrip your ability in 24 hours a day to be able to grow your business.
I think that's really key. So thanks for mentioning all of that too. Because I think for some people, they feel like they do have to do it all. So I think just you mentioning the fact that you've had clients that have recognized that they can't and have had to pass it off and really think a little bit more strategically about who they bring in and how is helpful. Last but not least on the list here, and then before we ask a question and close up, what about funding?
So critical. Access to capital is probably the number one reason businesses fail or make it, of all the other reasons. So let's say we've got all the other parts, all the other pillars, all the other steps in order. This is a business that requires huge capital investment in order to grow. It doesn't require a whole lot of capital investment to start, which is kind of the dichotomy of the founders and growing emerging brands, is you can get into this business really cheap, but you can't go very far, very cheap. So one of the things, again, we go back to this role of founder is, I look at people, and if there's a team, for instance, is okay, so who's the fundraiser? Because you're going to be raising funds. And a long, good conversation, if we have one at Trail Mix, is a person who's been, working at Trailhead, is Louis Armstrong of Killer Creamery, and Louis has been on a sort of a 3-year journey in seeking the proper amount of funding for his company. And it is growing at a rate that he needs to keep that going, right? Because, this level, that level, and yes, it's growing. It's very successful. It's a wonderful brand. He's a great guy, but you still have to have funding in order to grow. And a lot of people getting into the business don't realize. They say, well, I don't want to give up, equity in my company. Well, okay, you might not have to, but you're probably going to have to. So you should at least be prepared for that gap between friends and family where you're bootstrapping it, and that's great, to where you actually can go out and raise money, in the market. You've got angels in there and whatever. Forget about, for the most part, banks are not terribly interested in you at the stage that you need the money. And so it becomes a major part of building the business, access to capital, and understand that you're going to have a fundraising plan, and you're going to have to learn the alphabet of Series A and Series B. But that's going to be part of what you're doing. And the two things that are really important about that is, number one, is the messaging of how you're going to build the business and where it's going to go. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the numbers. It has to make sense. It has to be realistic. People who are going to invest in you, don't try to do funny books, because they're in the book business and the numbers business. And so put it out there, be realistic, but be prepared that this is something that you're going to continually do as long as you grow.
You've seen a lot in your journey at CPG, and then also now helping many of these founders get onto retail shelves. So if you had one piece of advice that you could give somebody that's just starting out, or maybe one thing that you see somebody trip over all the time that you just wish that you could kind of, take people by the shoulders and say, please don't do this. What would that one piece of advice be?
Well, it's funny because to nail it down, of course, to one thing is really hard, but I ask guests on the Next Level Brands podcast at the end of the podcast. That's what I ask everybody is, give me a piece of advice you want to share with entrepreneurs, which we've turned into another thing called words to grow by. My favorite words to grow by, which I call any piece of advice like that, actually comes from a fellow with a company that he did a lot of experimentation before he got the product line right and was willing to do it. And my piece of advice is don't pay attention to initial results. So if you go out and you get rebuffed, if the buyer won't take your phone call, if the distributor doesn't like your product, if that particular flavor didn't go over really well at the farmer's market, don't worry about the initial results. Worry about the journey. Worry about the long journey. Try to find out, maybe it has too much habanero in it. That could be possible, right? So don't be put off by whatever your initial results are or your rebuffs. Keep at it, because it's a long game.
I love that. Play the long game. I think that's a good thing to end on. And with that, thank you so much for being here, Steve. It's been really great to chat with you.
Appreciate it.
And we'll let everybody go. Hope this is helpful. And we'll also link down below for where people can go to find you and your podcast. So thanks again.
Thanks.